To get on next, we should be like, oh no, we got raided, bro. See how long it takes me to figure it out. Oh, it never. Takes a while to blow up, though. That's what I know. Oh my god, dude, come on.
Yeah, we're getting mad.
Are you stupid? No.
World War I, also known as the First World War or the War to End All Wars. Spoiler alert, it did not. Or named the Great War, which makes absolutely no sense but fits beautifully between good and awesome. The Great War basically started with one dude with a Bosnian Lives Matter flag who fragged a guy in a car who happened to be the Archduke of Austria. Well, almost. The Archduke survived the attack, but was dumb enough to keep driving around trying to look cool. Shortly after, he was shot and killed by someone else. This pissed off Austria-Hungary, who teamed up with Germany, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and a few more countries that, well, no one really gives a shit about. Serbia basically teamed up with roughly half of Europe and half of, actually, the rest of the world. There is your first hint about who's going to win this thing. But Germany had a bold idea called the, oh my god, Schlieffen plan, to quickly invade France and win the war. Second spoiler alert, it did not. The First World War is known for its static battles with insane high casualty rates, often without significant gains for either side. The first military campaign was launched in 1914 by Austria-Hungary against the Kingdom of Serbia. After fucking up 3 invasion attempts, Serbia was successfully invaded in 1915. Meanwhile, in the West, the Germans initiated their Schlieffen plan. Basically, the idea was to invade Belgium where they expected little resistance. Then use their road and rail network to move all their shit, or shizer, straight into France. After which, they would stampede hundreds of miles south to the Swiss border and eat, oh, who's writing this rubbish? Cheese fondue. There's a couple of problems regarding the plan that are probably worth mentioning. For starters, the Belgians put up a fierce fight, likely due to their neutrality and Germany shitting all over it by invading, triggering Britain to send their expeditionary army to fuck up their plans even more. In addition, the Belgian road networks suck ass today, let alone in 1914. So you can imagine the Germans were forced to move their 250,000 troops mostly by rail, and of course, the Belgians continued shitting on German planning by blowing up their own rail infrastructure, which they still haven't fixed today. This video... Before even entering France, Germany was under the presumption that it was going to fight the Western powers first and deal with Russia just a little bit later. They reckoned 6 weeks for Russia to mobilize their troops, which took the Russians 15 days, just a little bit off by about 1 month. The result was 4 years of trench warfare in the West, with massive battles to break the stalemate. In the East, most battles were fought with more ability to maneuver. Even armored trains were used for offensive operations. Some of the largest battles taking place in the West was the Battle of Verdun. the Battle of the Somme. The Third Ypres campaign. Yes, there were 2 more, and yes, lots of people died. The German 1918 spring offensive, and eventually the Battle of Amiens that led to the end of the war. During those times, both sides developed new weapons, with poisonous gas being arguably the most controversial. The Battle of Verdun is the longest battle in military history, beginning on February the 21st until December the 18th, 1916. The initial German advance brought some successes. One of them was the capture of the French Douaumont fortress without firing a single shot. Perhaps the French soldiers were too busy eating their baguettes and drinking Le Cognac. Initially, the Germans planned to hold the high ground west of Verdun, while the Allies kept sending reinforcements. This was done via a supply road that was bombarded intensively throughout the battle. The losses mounted on both sides, and after 5 months, the Germans had to divert troops to the Battle of the Somme. Moving over to the seas, most battles were fought between German U-boats and the Allied navies. At the Battle of Jutland, the surface fleets of both sides met and exchanged fire. Germany sunk more ships, but still shat their lederhoses because of Britain and because of, well, too many ships. They withdrew their fleet and kept it in the port for the rest of the war. Back on land, the Battle of the Somme was becoming even deadlier than Verdun. The first day, the British alone suffered more than 57,000 casualties. The Allied planners were too optimistic about breaking through German defences, a costly lesson by anybody's standard. By now, the British started to deploy different types of tanks. A male-classed variant with 6-pounder guns and a female version armed with machine guns rolled over the battlefield. A non-binary tank with no guns was also in development because... okay, no, I can't do it. Of course it wasn't. The whole world was killing each other, but they weren't crazy. A year later, the French army introduced the Renault 17 tank with a full rotating turret. The first tank that could do a 360 no-scope. The Germans suffered less casualties than the Allies because they were mostly on the defensive after their initial invasion. That's why they pimped up their trenches a bit more to include massage salons and jacuzzis. Well, maybe not those last two, but still, they did look better. In 1917, Germans were wearing their happy socks because the Russian Revolution ended the war in the east, and Germany could now transfer many divisions to the west to support their upcoming spring offensive. In the same year, the US joined the war. So the German offensive was an all-in situation for Germany to save themselves from US intervention. In the skies above, more and more planes emerged. At the start of the war, most planes flew scout missions, but as the war progressed, these planes were getting involved in combat missions. At first, pilots drew pistols to shoot at each other, and bombs were carried on a pilot's lap before being thrown out. Jesus. These Wild West pistol shootouts were transformed to dogfights between fighter planes and bombers took over the role for strategic bombing. Far down below, the Third Battle of Ypres, or Battle of Passchendaele, unfolded. Basically, another great battle with great losses around another tiny-ass village. Except this time, all the fighting took place in 3 feet of mud. Not pleasant at all. Meanwhile, outside of Europe, battles were fought between Allied colonial-controlled countries in Africa and German-occupied territories. However, most European countries did not give a fuck about Africa, and even argued to collaborate to keep repressing the indigenous population. Does that sound a bit like racism to you? Speaking of racism, did you hear about the Ottomans and the Armenians in World War I? Just a question. No controversial references intended, of course. Now, on to a more serious note. The Ottomans also threatened the British Army by trying to butt-plug the Suez Canal. In the north, they advanced through the Caucasus to fight the Russian Empire. In East Asia and the Pacific, the Germans were also bullied by the Japanese, who occupied vast territories from them. And yes, Germany and Japan were not best buddies yet, because this is the First World War and not the Second. Minor detail. Back in the West, the German army made initial gains with their spring offensive and even came within 100 kilometers of Paris. They brought in some giant railroad guns and fired off a few shots at the city center to piss off the city folks. By now, the German operation faced logistical challenges. Fortunately, they had experience with their Schlieffen plan. So they, did not do anything, did not fix anything, and the entire plan went into the shitter once again. To make matters worse, the Allies transformed the front line into a clustering web fight of trenches. What followed was the Battle of Amiens, being part of the 100-day offensive that eventually moved the Allied troops beyond the heavily defended Hindenburg Line. By now, only Germany was left fighting the Allies, and the morale in the German army at this point was, shall we say, pretty bad. With their previous failed spring offensive and mounting losses now exceeding those of the Allies, timing was everything for Germany to end the war as soon as possible. In a dense forest on the outskirts of Compiègne, the German delegation met with a few important-looking Allied foes to sign the armistice. The signing eventually led to the Treaty of Versailles, a piece of paper basically stating Germany was going to pay big time for 4 years of shit, give up a big chunk of German territory to pissed-off neighbours, and finally pinky promise to never start another world war, especially one that is promoted by a screaming Austrian guy with a square moustache. The armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918 at 5:45 a.m. and came into effect at 11 o'clock the same day, which is a bit of a shame for particularly one soldier who died 1 minute before 11. Again, timing is everything.